In this chapter we move to the lower half of our ninja, modelling the pants, bandage wrapped shins, and his belt. So here is our ninja as we left him from the last chapter, after just finishing the hands and handguards. And to begin modelling the legs, I'm just going to come back and turn on the background image in each of our windows. And I'll also switch it back from the hand reference to our body reference. And just place the background around the same proportions as our ninja in the front and side. I'll also come down and left click drag this corner area of the window so that it lines up with the split in the windows above. From there I can grab the corners of each of these windows and left click drag into the window below to cancel out our timeline windows, so that since we're working with a much more vertical mesh, I'm going to use the utilize all the screen space I can vertically. I'm also going to just stretch my concept window a little bit larger and just zoom and move my concept image so I can see the leg in view. So now I'm going to add a circle, make the vertices 16, and this is placed in the center of the Z-axis grid. So the 3D cursor is at the origin of the torso object. And I'm just moving the vertices down in edit mode so that the object origin stays in the same spot, and just placing that around the waist area. And then grabbing the very middle front vertex, I'm going to use proportional editing, move the scroll wheel to make the radius of effect a bit larger, and just dip the waistline of our pants down a little bit further towards the pelvis. So the aim is that the verts will dip at the front and back, and just arc and rise at the sides. I'll then delete all the vertices on one side again, and then add a mirror modifier. And if the vertices don't show up on one side while in edit mode, you can always just come down and turn on View Mirror Modifier while in edit mode. So we're really forming the waistline of our pants here, and I'm going to just come in now, and by moving with G and then hitting Shift Z, I can lock the movement to just the X and Y. So the verts will only move in a horizontal plane. Basically I'm just placing them closely to the torso mesh. And at this point in the background image options, I can just change the transparency and tone it down a little bit so I can see better. And now I'm ready to extrude. I'll extrude downwards and just scale along the Z-axis a small amount to flatten the vertices. I'll then make sure to turn clipping on in my mirror modifier options, and scale and move the vertices outward to match the outline of our legs here. I've just made another cut in between the other two, and I can start pushing out the gluteus maximus area, the behind, I guess you could say. And also some of the vertices at the middle front there, I'll start pushing in a little bit, as that will then form our crease meeting point of the two pant legs. Fairly happy with the basic area of the hips and waist. I'm then just going to take the very bottom front and back verts, press F to add an edge, and subdivide. I'll then move those vertices down, and that will represent the meeting point of our two pant legs. I'm not too happy with this first try, so I'll just delete the vertices again and have another crack at that. This time I'll just start with one subdivision instead of 2. As I want to keep the vertices a little low, because I'm now going to select this whole loop, including the in-between vertices, and extrude them out, making sure clipping in the mirror modifier options is turned off, and split it away from the center. And then I can also grab the very bottom vertice there and just push it over the other side of the mirror point. With clipping off, it will just simply mirror right over to the other side. So now I've just extruded the start of the trouser leg. I'm going to add a subsurf modifier. Smooth the mesh out, and that can give me a bit more of an indication of the shape of the pants at this very low resolution. So I'm just blocking out the basic shape. And then I can make another extrusion downward. Taking care of my side reference as well. I've made this extrusion all the way down to the knee, at which point I can add another loop cut just a little bit higher at the bottom, and one more. And then I'll grab this bottom extrusion that I made, puff it out a little bit, and with the very bottom edge loop, I'll just scale that down so that the pants will form a sort of scrunching area as we have the bandage shin and the knee armor at that point. I'll push some of these vertices in. And even though this is a very low density mesh, I'm taking care on the general shape here and where I place my edge loops. At this point, I'm not sure whether I'm going to sculpt the pants later to get the effect of cloth ripples or do it via cloth simulation. So I'll just push down the bottom loop a little bit and rotate the loop above it. Push my waistline out a little bit so that there's no intersections. And I can even come into the torso object if I really feel like I don't want to push the waistline out any further. So his behind looks a little bit flat here, so I'm just going to puff that out a bit more. And that's looking pretty good for the shape. So we have our basic pants blocking here. And now I might move on to just blocking out the area of the shins before we add the detail and bandages. I'll take the bottom loop of vertices from the pants block and just separate them into its own object. Smooth down once. And then I can just scale to fit about the width of the shins. At this point I can just hit numpad / key to bring that into a local view, come into top view, and just have a look at my top-down cross-section to make any needed adjustments. I'm just again looking at my own shin to get a feeling of where the muscle is, where the bone is, and what the cross-section will look like. Once again, I'll just start extruding downward, thinking about where I can push vertices in or out. For example, the shin bone kind of sticks out at the front, and then there's a little bit of a dip inward, and then you get the real meat muscly area of the calf that comes out at the back. So I'll keep this in mind as I extrude down again. And basically these front two vertices are going to be acting as my shin bone, and I'm making sure to just move them along the x-axis left or right, just to match up with the point that I imagine the bone will be sticking out the most. Making another extrusion down and just lining up first to my front reference or side reference, and then the other. And here, as I come down to the bottom of the foot, I'm just going to angle the vertices upward by just rotating in the side view and making the vertices a little bit scaled on the y-axis to stretch a little bit at the bottom there towards the heel and a little towards the top of the foot. So now I'll just adjust some of the pants there to line up nicely over the basic shin block. And this shin block here, just like our forearm, will act as a basis for our shrink modifier that we'll add later on. But I'll add that in the detailing in part 2. First off though, I'd like to model our ninja's belt that you can see in his concept. I'll just make some tweaks to the waistline before I get started. And then I'll select the whole top loop of vertices, duplicate them, press P, and separate by selection. And then we have the start of our belt. I'll just pan my concept art so that I can see the belt itself. And there's a whole bunch of pockets and knives and a belt buckle there, and I'll tackle them all later on in the accessories chapter. But for now I'm just going to go with the basic shape of the belt itself. I've extruded once downward, and I've just scaled out a little bit to get rid of intersections. And I can also just manually push out any vertices that I need to. Of course, then just selected all verts, made them smooth, and just hit Ctrl N to make sure the normals were flipped correctly. I've now just unchecked subsurf in edit mode, so when I go into edit mode, I'm going to just see my blocked mesh without any subdivisions, and when I go out of edit mode I can see how it looks in subsurf. So initially it will look a little weird before I add beveling, and that's why I'm just going to turn off the subsurf while I'm editing the basic shape of the belt. And just like with translation earlier, if I hit S to scale and then Shift Z, that will allow me to scale only on the X and Y axes, and that will push the belt outward but not make it any thicker vertically on the Z axis. And that can be very handy for just pushing the belt out of the waist to some amount. Now I've just made an extrusion out with these faces selected, and that will form the first flap. And because it's mirrored, we've got a flap on each side. And I'm just going to play with the scale of that, looking at my concept art. Having a look at length as well, and I've sort of guessed how many vertices it goes back around the waist. I just took a guess at that. And then I'll just make another extrusion as it sort of fans out a little bit. And from there I'll just play with how much it comes out away from the pants, and also how much forward and back. Now I also imagine that if he's got a flap at the front there, there'll also be one at the back. So by just extruding these faces out also, it will mirror on each side and just make one flap that covers all over the back. And here I'm just turning off Subsurf in our 3D view. So there's our basic block of our belt. And from there we're just going to go in and add some beveling loop cuts so that it will look quite nice when subsurfed. I'll start by adding a loop cut just at the bottom here. And again, basically for every corner I'm going to add a loop cut on one side of the corner and the other. And the closer that I bring that loop cut to the edge, the sharper the shape will be. I'll come back in and turn Subsurf on again, and also in edit mode. Now we can see the remaining edges to bevel. So I can't forget to add some bevel edge loop cuts for each flap. And also horizontally. One of the downsides you see now from adding this bevel edge loop cut is that we've got this humongous crease where we don't want one, which is along the area that should be a smooth, round part of the belt. By just selecting the top vertices, I can just hit Ctrl E, edge slide them towards the middle a bit, and you'll notice that the crease there is a lot less harsh. Now for the bottom of the flap down there to be sharper, I need to make yet another cut. And again, this will make a cut all the way across. So again, to smooth out the area of the belt, I will just edge slide the other side. Now it's still a little bit noticeable, so I might try a few things to soften that area out. I might try adding a loop cut here and just pulling these two middle vertices outward. And that works fairly well. Still slightly noticeable, but I'll move onward. I'll make another loop cut here at the bottom of the flap just to sharpen that one out. And once again, make an edge cut on the side there and edge slide some vertices out to smooth the area. Now in keeping with the same design idea as the handguard, I'm just going to select all of these faces, extrude them, right click to get rid of the auto move, and just press smooth once. And that will move all the vertices inward without causing any weird indenting. Now what that allows me to do then is have a loop that goes all the way around the flap, and I can just make a loop cut there, hold Control and Alt, then right click to select the entire face loop, so 2 edge loops, just a quicker way to do it, and then I'll extrude that inward just a tad. Now I could make 2 more bevel loop cuts here to flatten out this area of the indent, but that really is just going to be too many loops to work with. So by just selecting these vertices that you see here, I'm going to go into the spacebar menu, type edge crease, and just select that from the menu, and I can just pull the mouse away from the center of the vertices and cause the mesh to crease. And this is just a very easy way if you really are stuck and making a loop cut or any other type of mesh editing is really too much work and won't be worth it. You can always rely on an edge crease to get a nice sharp edge. I don't recommend it being overused, but in some situations where you need it, it can be very handy. I figure also to show like it really is a flap that's thins a bit as it connects to the belt. I've just made another loop cut in between the flap and the belt. And then I'm just going to move this front part of the flap a little bit closer to the middle. And I'll also just add an edge crease to this last corner of the flap. I'll just readjust some of the vertices of the pants now that I have the belt in place. And then I'll just, by using Shift Z after pressing G to move, pull out some of the areas of the belt to match with the waist. Again, making some more loop cuts and smoothing out the top area. And I seem to be spending a lot of time trying to smooth out this belt area now after I've added these loop cuts. I'll figure out how to smooth that out a bit better in a moment. Lastly though, I'll just work on the indent for the back flap. I'll select these 4 faces here, smooth them as well, make a loop cut in the newly formed loop, extrude in that thin face loop. Just made another extrusion between the flap and the belt, and then because it's mirrored, I only need to add 2 creases here at the corner of the flap. The lack of smoothness on this belt is really starting to bother me, so I might just have a little bit of time to work on this. I'm going to just hit X and delete that middle edge loop after selecting it with Alt right click. And I'm just experimenting at the moment now. I'm just going to edge slide these vertices out to the middle, and because I made that loop cut between the flap and the belt, I notice I can push these out to the middle and the mesh doesn't seem to stretch and lose its bevel too much. So just by evening out these vertices, that starts to look a lot better, thanks to the extra loop cuts that were made horizontally. And I'm always a fan of hiding any problems if I can get away with it. And here we're going to have the belt buckle model later on, so all of those vertices that are causing creases, I'm just going to push them towards the middle. And even though it's a little bit bumpy there, it will be hidden behind the belt buckle later on. I'm looking at the concept art again and making various tweaks to the belt, just scaling and then hitting Shift Z to just stretch the belt outward, and also just moving on the Z axis up and down to change its height to something that looks nice. I'll then just smooth out the top row of the belt vertices and adjust the vertices of the pants to hide behind the belt. And I'm quite happy with the blocking now, and I can just have a look at my concept art and have a think about areas that I could tweak and improve. So I figure maybe this belt at the back here, the flap could be a little bit lower, just to match the ones on the side. And now I'm going to come in and apply the mirror modifier on the belt, because as you can see in the concept also, one of the flaps is shorter than the other. So with mirror applied, I can just pull these rows of vertices up. It's a great idea that David added to the design, this asymmetry. And with the basic elements modeled, we can move forward into part 2 and add some details.